The presenting sponsor of OnEducation is Participate. Lately, teachers from all over have been working together to find new approaches to provide quality remote education. Participate's sister company, Participate Learning, presents United We Teach, a global gathering place for educators to share distance learning resources as we navigate these strange times. For these resources and more, visit participate.com/oneducation.
If I was an entertainer, I was like, hey, you get to perform at our concert. Sweet. Okay, you have to pay to get here. You're going to have to pay everything, all your expenses paid, come out of your pocket.
Welcome to OnEducation, part of the On Podcast Media Network. My name is Mike Washburn.
And I'm Glen Irvin. Friends, we have an awesome pod for you today. We will discuss whether remote learning was effective, how we can prevent the summer slide through games like Minecraft and eSports. And our guest this week is Director of Technology, Adam Phyall.
So we have to wrap this up as quickly as possible because it's, so we're recording on Thursday, which we don't normally do, Thursday afternoon. Mm-hmm. The PlayStation 5 reveal show is literally happening right now. And we're missing it. I'm missing it. You don't have a PlayStation, if I'm not mistaken. And you're Xbox. You're an Xbox.
The last one
guy.
I had was the original. Actually, I owned a PlayStation 2.
So
I remember that. And I think I owned the original one too, because it was the only system that had, at that point, Final Fantasy VII, I want to say, was PlayStation 2. Mm-hmm. And what an awesome game. My God. That's one of the classic. That should be on top of the, the top 100 list that we've talked about before. My God, that game.
They've remade it, right?
Yeah, and
it just came out like a couple weeks ago.
Yeah, they remade it, or
like it's a whole remastered version. It's even got different combat and everything.
Oh, I'd like to play that.
You need to buy a PlayStation.
Oh man. Yeah, see, we've invested so much in the Microsoft Xbox game. I hate that that's two competing companies, and a lot of the time it's content that's specific to the one system. It'll be interesting to see what they say, what they come out with, and especially, what the most important thing is, not even the graphic card and this and that. And it'll play 56,000K, whatever it might be, as far as the visibility. It's the content. So if they say, like if Xbox came out and they were like, we have the new Elder Scrolls, it's going to be part of the system, and it's going to come out with the game, that would excite me. Same thing with PlayStation. If they say the content that's coming out is this new game that we've all been waiting for, that's exciting.
Yeah, for sure. Hey, so do you play? So you play farming? So you bought Farming Simulator? Yes. And because we're all addicted to farming games here in this little community of ours. Somehow this is what we've decided to coalesce around.
Yeah, we love the farming.
Is farming games. And you play it with your father-in-law and your kids. Do you play that on Xbox?
I play it on Xbox. But I haven't. I own it here for the computer. So I will start investing some time into it here on the computer. But I play with my father-in-law. It's hilarious.
And do you like it?
It's fantastic. It's a
really?
it's very detailed, let's call it. It's very super nerdy on the farming aspect. So it's not just like farm together where you're just kind of planning things, blah, 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 and you, the goal is to, build up your farm, have different things. This is more like very nerdy, intricate. How you spend your money is super important. What you do with your crops at the certain specific points of their growth matters as far as their growth. And so there's a lot. I think you would really, really like it because
I bought it.
There's a big nerd out factor to it. So you can really, there's some huge communities that, can you imagine this? We're talking about Farming Simulator. But anyway, there are some huge communities of people that play this in various different ways, but but basically talk about, the min-max players, that try to maximize the output of the crops. But there's people who try to become experts at basically planting and harvesting crops to be the fastest, kind of those types of things. And so
is there like a research tree and stuff like that?
Oh,
is
yeah.
There...
No. Yeah? No, there's not a research tree. It's more, and it's a game where it's super hands off, and you have to go in there unless you want to go in and do some research, which I've done, been doing some research. It's super hands off. You don't even know which equipment you should be doing, which equipment you should be using, how often you should be fertilizing, when you should actually harvest your crops, what about the weeds, et cetera, and so forth.
Interesting.
And so it's very, very, very much hands off, and then you explore, and it's super cool because it's multiplayer. So like my father-in-law and I, he lives in North Dakota and I'm here in Minnesota, and we'll be playing for hours on end. And my wife just makes fun of us because she's like, my God, how can that be a game?
Okay, I'm tempted. I bought it because I knew you bought it.
Yeah.
And
we'll have to play it. Yeah.
And
we'll have to just start from scratch. It's pretty awesome.
I'm thinking about it. I need something tonight to relax with a little bit later. So maybe that's what I do.
It is a relaxing game. Yes.
Have you one other small piece of kind of small talk here? Have you watched this show yet, Space Force?
I have not. It's the #1 show on Netflix, though, right?
So it's The Office.
Yeah,
it's basically because it's Steve Carell.
Steve Carell. Yeah,
and he acts.
Is it funny?
And he's very similar to Michael Scott. Kind of like barely competent. Not as like. I think the main character, Steve Carell in Space Force, is more competent than Steve Carell in The Office. But you can see that, so basically his character runs Space Force, and it's very, the setting is very realistic too. Like, they don't name, it's not Trump, like the president isn't President Trump.
Okay.
But, there's a funny reference to him tweeting any minute now, and we don't know what he's going to say type thing.
Okay, yes.
But so it's about you, so get ready.
Yeah.
Kind of thing, which is really, really funny. It's a nice little nod to that the president in Space Force is very similar to President Trump.
I'm going to watch it, yes.
And so that makes Steve Carell barely competent at is just competent enough that it's plausible that he gets the job, but obviously not the best person for the job.
Okay.
So that's what makes Space Force so like it just hits home in so many ways. I'm not much of a TV watcher, and generally though Cheryl and I watch this while we're eating or whatever. We let the kids take over the watching TV sometimes in the living room, and we'll just sit on the kitchen island and watch TV together, and awesome. that's what we end up watching is Space Force. This other, so originally in the outline, this was Glenn is about to learn how to code because we normally record on Mondays, and you were on Unscripted with Brad Treffler, which is on the Participate Twitch channel. So do you know everything about coding with Google app scripts now?
Oh my goodness. It is so crazy amazing, yet super complex and intimidating at the same time, what you can actually do with the Google script. And we only, kind of just barely touched on a couple of things that Brad was attempting to go ahead and do. And it was super intriguing, but I was like, my goodness, you could take tons of courses. I'm sure there are tons of courses on how do you go about doing this and then for what purposes? And then what's, how do you, what are the types of things that you can go ahead and do to be able to make you and your teachers' lives, let's say, more efficient? You could tell that Brad, super expertise in it and passion in it. So it was interesting. And all I did is sit. It's interesting because his guest just kind of sits there
and listens.
Goes, and just listens and goes, oh, yeah. Kind of adds a little bit here and there, So it is cool. I thought it was interesting. Had seen him and Jake Miller on a previous episode, and I had just told Brad, I'm like, dude, that's a really interesting concept for a show. And he's like, you want to come on to it? I'm like, okay, but I'm worthless. And he's like, no, that's perfect. He's like, that's perfect. He's like, I want to make sure we're trying to help out anyone that's just basically watching that wants to learn, some of these concepts and whatever it might be. So very, very cool idea for a show and perfect host for it too with Brad.
I had it on and I had it idling kind of, and I had the volume off because I was in the middle of doing a couple things. But every time I looked over, I mean, I won't lie, you had kind of a deer in the headlights look on your face a couple times where it's like, oh my idea. God, what did I get myself into? Yeah.
that was the actual what I was feeling.
So I thought it was awesome that you were on it. I think that show is gonna be really interesting. Maybe started with a little bit of a drier topic, but I can't wait to see. I know Brad and I have talked about it, obviously, because I'm in charge of that channel and what goes on it. So, Brad and I have talked a little bit about it, and I'm really excited to see him maybe delve into like some game design and using some of these other game design engines to make games and do coding for games. And I think that would be really, really cool. And speaking of games, not that we haven't talked about games enough, actually. I think we've talked about games this entire show so far.
That's good.
But, I think you're here for the games sometimes too. Yeah. One of the really cool things that's coming out of the pandemic is the realization that games help in a lot of ways. Certainly in, I play Minecraft a lot. I think that goes without saying. And one of the things that I do all the time now is I leave Minecraft on and I leave it kind of idling in the background. And every time I have kind of a spare like 5 minutes between meetings or something like that, I just tab over to Minecraft and I play for a few minutes, and then I tab back and go about my day. But I find that 5 minutes, interlude is a nice little break from my mental health. And I kind of need that because my days are like, I'm in the middle. I'm not even close to done my day yet. And it's 5:00 in the afternoon. I have a webinar tonight at 8:00 at night, till 10:00. So, I think for me personally, I need something, to break up my day, and my meetings and stuff like that. And so we know though that, things like, Minecraft and, even like my son is playing a lot of Fortnite, and we know that these are helping them with their kind of their mental health and their, connectedness with their friends.
Yes.
But obviously, the camps are starting to roll out, and virtual camps, I think, are going to be definitely a thing this summer. And, there are a number of companies, and there's an article in the district administration website by Chris Bird, who we know. He's related to, he does work with FETC and whatnot. We've met him at the Epic Games party there at FETC this year. But talking about, for example, the Connected Camps company and creating some really cool opportunities for kids this summer that I thought was interesting.
Yeah. And I mean, the biggest thing is, you're right, that shift towards saying this is something that not only is for fun. Yeah. Yes, it is. Not only is positive as far as could be for relationships and social emotional well-being and mental health. Yes, that checkbox is there too. But as we've talked about on the show many times, it's also a great learning tool in a variety of different purposes. And And sometimes it's just for the sake of it being a creative outlet. And you've used it as far as Minecraft in that way, where it just becomes a way to express yourself, instead of using a paintbrush or a pencil or whatever it might be, like an artist would. You are using this three-dimensional environment to be able to use it as an outlet. And that's fantastic for our kids to have that opportunity to do that too, especially in a time when we're in a pandemic and we can't always go to all of the different places that we maybe wanted to this summer. This is a way to be able to go ahead and do some of those things too. And of course, we love that that this specific article is talking about Minecraft and esports in general too, to be able to form those relationships, get kids those opportunities that you talk about all the time, Mike, that they may or may not have the athletic abilities, to be able to participate on a team for, a local school or whatever it might be. But in this case, they have the abilities to be able to do a lot of different types of let's call them jobs within an esports team, whether it be a manager, a promotional person, and so on and so forth. And I know yourself, Steve Isaacs, and Dr. Haskell all talk about it's this huge ecosystem that's really growing. And not only is it growing, but day by day, it becomes more legitimized. And that's why we love talking about it and making sure that we don't lose sight on that. We continue to grow that and continue to say, yeah, this is something that we should be attempting to add in all of our schools.
So we're going to link an article in the show notes, and the title, frankly, of this article kind of pisses me off. Just saying.
Yeah.
And I don't have a subscription to the Wall Street Journal. I don't plan on getting one.
Yeah.
So I guess you have to have one to read it, or I don't know if you have access to it.
It's one of those things. Yeah, the Wall Street Journal is interesting as far as the website. If you've clicked on it with the specific, Chrome web address, Mike, like a thing, it reads how many times you've used it. So then if it's like your third time trying to click on it, it'll have that barrier. Do you know what I mean? So if anybody out there ever wants to go ahead and do that, if you open up a incognito window, usually it'll work. It'll actually open up the article, or just try it on your phone or for whatever it might be. If you find that barrier, it's because you've already been there a few different times and then got access to those articles. It doesn't always work. But the name of the article is Results Are In for Remote Learning. It didn't work. And so, yes, that.
What a stupid title.
Yes.
First off, the results aren't in for remote learning.
No.
I mean, we're just getting started with all of this. And certainly to suggest,
yes.
Where do I want to start with this?
Well, first of all, the way that they're judging as far as where they're getting the results from are from a standardized test. We call it the NWEA assessment. Sometimes for us, it was called the MAP test. It's all basically the same thing. Let's just call it's a standardized assessment that's given throughout the year. And I was trying to think through, Mike, how did they give this assessment? First of all, that kind of with all of the AP testing glitches and all the types of things going on. And then even if they gave it in a legitimate way, which I seriously doubt, how can we say that those results are, show anything? Students that are in the middle of a pandemic, they're at home, are taking an assessment of some sort where it measures their reading and their math abilities. I just hated that they put it that way because, like we've always said, most of these articles end up being great ways for people to, legislators specifically, or people with agendas, to be able to point back at that and then say, hey, you public schools did this, this, and this wrong and are doing this wrong. So we're going to pull funding, or we're going to do this other thing, or we're going to pass a law with et cetera, to make sure that we hold you accountable, those types of things.
Yeah. See, and you don't need technology in school. It doesn't matter. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. No, you're exactly right that this type of learning can't work and blah, blah, blah. And we know, and we've talked about on the show before in the past, that this is an exception to any rule that we've ever seen, as far as in our most recent times, as far as public education is concerned.
Yeah.
We can't compare this 2 months, 3 months that it was to anything that's ever happened in education in general at all. You can't compare it to anything. So that's the first thing. Second thing is, how did they actually measure it? And that's unclear. I think they showed some test results in the thing, which I think that's completely invalid. You can't. We most of the states canceled their state wide tests. Even the president got on to national, a conference and said, a press conference, and said we should cancel all of the standardized testing for the year because everybody knew it was going to be invalid. And so all of those factors, and then saying, yes, we're now going to say, hey, it didn't work. It's like, no. And our friend Philip Pulley has said this isn't remote learning. It's not distance learning. And so when people classify it in that way, it's just wrong. And this was a unprecedented time. Call it emergency learning. Call it something that more appropriately fits the time. And understand that it was very unique in what happened and what's still happening right now. So yeah, it sucks. I hate stuff like this.
Yeah. I mean, terrible. No, I don't think anyone would argue that what has happened the last few months, it's not perfect.
No.
But the environment is certainly not perfect and certainly not ideal. And you had a lot of teachers that needed to, upgrade their skills almost instantly under emergency conditions, while also, managing their own families through a global health crisis. Come on, people, and imagine and that's just like the things that everyone faced. Every single family that had kids faced those things. An imperfect situation under the threat of a global health crisis. That sounds pretty bad.
Yes.
And that's like our baseline, folks. And then there was what if you're a nurse? What if one of your spouses is a nurse? What if all of the other things,
so many factors
that aren't part of this baseline that changes everything about this equation. There are X factors everywhere. So to write such an irresponsible headline is just beyond for me. Pretty unsurprising, from the Wall Street Journal, I suppose. But it's just dumb. Just dumb. And it's frustrating because everyone is working so hard to make the best of it. And this is basically saying, teachers, you tried and you failed.
I know. I hate that kind of stuff. Ugh.
Right? You tried and failed to write a good headline.
Yeah, no, exactly. That's all it was about, is the clickbait title, and then boom, let's put that out there so we can make sure we get the clicks and sell the product. It's like, so frustrating. So frustrating.
There's one last thing here in the outline that is funny because it just kind of came up the other day. In between, actually, I think when we were set to record and now is when this actually kind of made its kind of mark, and that's Twitch, which is the streaming platform that a lot of almost everyone who uses, is being hammered with DMCA claims. DMCA is the digital media copyrights. So if you had this is Digital Millennium Copyright Act is the actual term for DMCA. Sorry. If you were playing, for example, Spotify on your stream in the background, which tons of people do.
Yes.
You probably just had to do a whole bunch of work on your stream to clean it up and get rid of a whole bunch of either files, videos, clips, a lot of there's a streamer that I watch all the time, and he was talking about it the other night. I watch him almost every night because I like watching the games he plays, and he was saying that he used to use Spotify, and he had to he spent the better part of 4 hours combing through all of his clips.
Yes.
For places where the audio was being flagged. And it took him hours and hours and hours. And, our friend Christina Ishmael would probably remind us that, they should have saw this coming, maybe, and expected it. And it came to my mind because I think that it's another great lesson in that copyright piece that a lot of teachers don't even really think about.
Yes.
And the complexities of copyright. And, just because you're a teacher, friends, doesn't mean you have carte blanche access to resources just because it's hashtag for the kids.
Yeah. No, you
does not give you the freedom to use whatever the heck you want.
And this was in the background too. So if everybody's thinking about like, what are you talking about? Well, just imagine we're watching Twitch and a lot of people playing video games on Twitch, and in the background for themselves and for their audience, they have some music playing. It's in the background, and they're playing their game and whatever might be. And that's what's being flagged. And almost everyone, like you just said, the person that you were just talking about, and almost everyone that I watch was in pure panic mode, because it's like a big part of them playing, right? And big part of even, and I'm sure maybe our audience members don't know this, but on Twitch, there's a way to basically create a reward system for your viewers, and they can accumulate points, basically, kind of a gamified way of doing stuff. And you can purchase things. So one of the things that you can purchase on many of these channels is a song request. So you could put in and like, hey, I want to listen to the X song, and they would put it on, and you'd use your points to be able to do that. And so that's gone now.
Yeah, a lot of people had to turn off song requests.
It's
the
crazy.
streamer that I'm talking about did that as well.
Yes,
so
it's interesting. Digital citizenship. Yeah.
Digital citizenship, friends. Even when we talk a hardcore gaming intro, we still end up back at digital citizenship and education. So I've wanted our next guest on the podcast for quite a while, and tried to connect a couple times, and hadn't been able to make it happen until now. And so when we come back, Dr. Adam Phyall will be with us. So stay tuned.
GoGuardian helps thousands of K-12 school districts maximize the learning potential of over 8 million students. GoGuardian's products enable productive and safe digital learning by helping educators identify learning patterns, protect students from harmful and distracting content, and support mental health. To support schools during their distance learning transition, GoGuardian is offering free access to their entire product suite until the end of the school year. To learn more about GoGuardian and download their free resources about distance learning, visit their Distance Learning Resource Center at goguardian.com/distance learning.
Welcome back to the podcast, everyone. Our guest this week is the Director of Technology and Media Studies for the Newton County School System in Georgia. Welcome to the podcast, Dr. Adam Phyall. Welcome.
Yeah, thanks for having me, guys. It is a pleasure and an honor to be a guest on your podcast.
Awesome. Congrats on your getting your doctorate, man. That's a hell of an accomplishment. And, you have kids and a very busy, demanding job. Tell us a little bit about the experience and, how does it feel being Dr. Adam Phyall?
Tell you, the journey was a journey. I started the process when I was in Kansas City, Missouri. Now I'm in Georgia, so I've done it across country. I started the process. I now have 3 kids. When I started the process, I had 1. So I started with a pregnant wife and finished with 3 kids. So it definitely was something that was a labor of love. Definitely couldn't have completed it without the support of my wife and kids, because it was many nights, many days where Daddy was isolated by himself in his room, doing a lot of reading and a lot of writing. But it really it was one of those things that now it's finally kind of setting in that it's doctor. When people introduce me, like I still It's still kind of odd, like when you introduce me, it's like, oh yeah, I am doctor.
I love doing that too. I love seeing the smile on people's faces, especially when it's just like when it's fairly new, and then you're there's I feel like there must be in a sense of accomplishment when you get introduced like that. That's pretty surreal, even, right?
Yeah, it makes me straighten up my posture a little bit. Yeah.
That's awesome. Well, listen, it's an amazing accomplishment, and super excited for you. We appreciate you coming on during what's obviously an incredibly tough time. So tell us a little bit about how you are. How's your family, and all of that.
Well, right now it's one of those things where having kids, my kids are 9, 5, and 3. So it's a very unique age in trying to explain to them what's going on in the world and still trying to shelter them because you still want them to have their innocence. Kids are still believing in Santa Claus, the Tooth Fairy, and all that fun stuff because they are real. But also not wanting to have a situation where now they're in fear of everything that's going on. They're scared to go outside. Whether you're talking about the COVID or the social change and unrest that's going on, there's just so many things happening right now. So it's making them aware, but then it's not trying to scare them of all the issues that we're facing today.
Yeah. And what's work looked like for you? What's your day looked like? How has this affected your job?
Well, the crazy thing about it is, my wife also works in the school system that I work in as well. She is a science elementary coordinator. So it's one of the things where we've been able to kind of, I'd go in one day, she would work from home. So we've been able to kind of, even during the shelter in place, having to do whether it's WebEx or Zoom or Google Meet, having to tag team and try to stagger our meetings so we're not meeting at the same time, keeping the kids busy. Because, of course, as everyone else is dealing with, their kids hopping in meetings and, Daddy, I need another juice. They won't let me watch anything on TV. My iPad needs to charge. So dealing with all those things. So it was definitely trying to get the kids situated and do our thing and trying to limit the amount of interruptions we had. But it's one of those things, and I told a few people in another meeting that I was in, I not to brag or boast, but between my wife and I, we have about 5 or 6 degrees. We're well educated. We have a gig of internet access, and we were still struggling to make ends meet day to day and figure things out. So I can only imagine what it was like for some of our parents and our community members that weren't afforded the resources that we had at our disposal and trying to make it work. Because, of course, on top of that, still trying to be teachers for our own kids as well in the household. So if we kind of, quote unquote, have our things together, I can only imagine what it's like for everyone else. So it was definitely a struggle. But, don't cry for me. But there's definitely, I have to think about our community because in my district, we have a high poverty rate of our families. We were like at 70% free reduced lunch families in our district. So I can only imagine some of the struggle that some of those parents were dealing with during this time period as well.
So in your position, Adam, next fall, we're already thinking about it, I'm sure, and it's filled with uncertainty. Is there any advice you have for educators as far as PD or training or things that they should be doing this summer in preparation for the many possibilities next fall? I know departments of education throughout the country have already started putting out statements. In our state, we had 3 different scenarios that are possibly going to happen. I'm not sure what the Department of Education in Georgia has put out, but are you guys as a district already thinking about these things? And is there any advice you have that you've given to your teachers or even teachers in general?
The first piece of advice that I've kind of been really pushing throughout this period, it's not even anything related to professional learning or technical. I'm just telling everybody, stay centered. Remember why you got in this business. Remember why you're doing what you're doing. because you're going to get inundated. You're going to get pulled in many directions. So you have to stay centered and you have to stay focused. That's first and foremost. I tell my team that every day, because it's the whole mental health aspect of being a person in charge, a person that people look to. We have to take care of ourselves, because if we're no good, we can't help other people. So first and foremost, that's the number one thing I've told my team, and I've been telling teachers. But one of the things also we've really been focusing in on is that on-time learning. We've been preaching that for years, but I think now it's really hitting home with people that you have to have training modules. You have to have the resources, where if a teacher is trying to do something in the learning management platform, it's just a click away to find out how to do those things. Because our state's kind of giving the guidance to be able, all districts should have some system in place for virtual learning.
Okay.
You're going to have some students that will be physically in the building, but you're still going to have to provide learning opportunities for parents and students who don't want to come into the space. And we're going to also have some kids who are still going to be on our books, if you will, but they won't probably physically set it to a foot in our buildings the whole school year. So what does that look like as well?
Yes.
So doing a full online learning platform for those students without inundating the teachers to totally change how they know how to teach.
Awesome. So in addition to, dealing with a global health pandemic, the United States of America specifically has been grappling with a social justice pandemic at the same time that has I used the word reckoning today.
Yes.
And I think that's an appropriate word to use as well. We're experiencing in particular in the United States a reckoning related to race and racial justice. And we had an amazing conversation last week with Michael Bonner about his thoughts. And I wanted to ask you, because I've been thinking about this week, and we kind of talked a little bit about this on our live show on Friday on the stream. And it's come up a couple times now in other scenarios. I'm curious what sort of communications, I've been thinking about communications that have been going out to teachers in regards to Black Lives Matter and the murder of George Floyd. And whether I'm curious about your school district specifically, but just in general, thoughts on the idea of districts passing on guidance related to how to talk to their students about. Our students aren't dumb. They can watch TV too, right? They know what's going on. And especially if your parents are kind of socially, like my son, hears my wife and I talking about this stuff all the time. And I mean, he can, he has ears. He can hear the conversations going on. And because he's not little, he's 12, the older one's 12 years old. He can kind of even put it together a little bit, right? So we've got to grapple with how we talk to our students about this stuff. How do, and I don't think that it's the district's place to put words in people's mouths. But certainly, I would, if I was a teacher, appreciate having some guidance from the district on what their thoughts are on what where we take this. I'm curious if your district did anything like that, and if you have thoughts on that kind of in general.
Yeah, we've kind of, interesting, last year in my district, we've started the conversation around implicit bias. That was kind of our focus, starting it in small pockets last year and moving in that direction. Just let me pause for a second to kind of back up to set the stage for everyone. I'm in Georgia. This is the Deep South. This is Dixie country. This is Confederate flag. This is Klan country, if you will. So all those roots are still here in our district. I'd be foolish to sit here and say that we don't have any parents or I hate to say it, but even some teachers who still feel that all this is overblown. and that's happening right now. So we've actually looked at first having the conversations with our staff and our administrators, because we feel as though you cannot have that conversation with your students if you're not in a good place. So really understanding that this time in our country is a pivotal time. This is one of those times where we're going to look back and see what side of history were you on. Something I never thought I'd see in my life. NASCAR has decided to get rid of the Confederate flag and ban it from all racetracks and everywhere. I never thought I would see that. But even with that being said, you still have a race car driver saying that this isn't the NASCAR I grew up with and I'm leaving after this season. So you still have people who will draw their line in the sand on these issues. We've had the conversation in this country of even saying Black Lives Matter was being a controversial statement. You know, and I saw this comedian talking about it, and it wasn't even the fact that we're saying Black lives are better, just matter. Just agree with me that they matter. If you can't agree that they matter, that's a problem. But I think now with all the things going, people realize, oh yeah, actually they do matter, and we need to have those conversations. So we have to figure that out. And I think right now, just talking with my superintendent, we've kind of had some sidebar conversations about it. We're still trying to figure out what's the best way to have that conversation with adults, because this isn't something as simple as saying we need to do something about poverty, because that's an easy topic. Because, yeah, everybody's poor, you know, let's help the poor kids. Yay. You can get behind that. You don't have to change the core of your belief system to do that. When you start talking about equity, Black Lives Matter, implicit bias, all those components, you're having to change who you are as a person and at your core, because you have to look internally and see, do I have some biases that come out in my lessons, that come out in my classroom, that I may not call this one parent or this one child because of my own racial beliefs about this person. I may think, oh, well, they just don't care about education, so why should I even bother, versus this other family that, because I know them, we go to the same church, or we grew up together. So those are all those things that make people look internally, that are those uncomfortable conversations that we have to have. And we're grappling to figure out what's going to be the best way to have that conversation, because it is going to be uncomfortable. And I promise you this, there's going to be a lot of people also in education that leave the field because they feel that this is not something that they should discuss. I hope that's not the case, but actually I do hope it is the case, because we don't need those people working with kids.
Absolutely. So, Adam, we actually have met at a educational conference. So that's where I want to talk about right now, is educational conferences, both nationally and locally. And we've had other guests and we've spoke about this topic even previous to what's happened in the last few weeks, that there's a definitive issue with keynote speakers, presenters, and even the attendees just being white at these national conferences. Are conferences like ISTE or FETC doing enough to include our educators and leaders of color to both present? But then I was also thinking about just attending these conferences too. And what other types of things can we be doing, and by we I mean these conferences, to include our educators and leaders of color?
And there's so many ways we can go with that one. Yeah. One thing I kind of want to touch on. Unfortunately, you often get a lot of teachers of color that are working in low income districts. Yes. You can talk to, I talk to a lot of my peers that are out there and more affluent districts, and they're like, oh, we're struggling to get black teachers here, so on and so forth. So going with that current norm. So if you have a lot of teachers of color that are in low income districts, they can't afford to go to these conferences. No. So something like an FETC, ISTE, TCA, all these large conferences, the registration, the plane, the hotel, they can't even afford to go. So
it's like $4,000. To go to
Mm-hmm.
ISTE, it's almost $4,000. I mean, it's insane.
So let's just call that what that is. So there has to be some kind of way, whether you're talking about some kind of scholarships or partners with vendors, to do some of those things to get those educators in those districts there. Because here's also one of those things to think about. A lot of those low income districts are probably buying a lot of products that are going to be at these various trade shows. And so those districts should work with, and once again, it's that, you start getting into legality and money and all that stuff, but there has to be some kind of way to have scholarships, sponsorships to get teachers at these national conferences. Mm-hmm. And then also, we have to look at who's making the selection for these featured speakers and keynote speakers. Is there diversity in the room to know who are those voices that are out there? Because we are creatures of habit. I know the people that I know, and those are the people that I'm going to give opportunities to. And the more opportunities those people have, the bigger their names become, the more of a phenom, the more of a person that people go to and click on and see what they're doing. And so all of a sudden that person now becomes the hot featured or hot keynote speaker. But if those awesome educators that are educators of color don't get that opportunity to get outside of their circle or their community, then they don't get the national stage. Then we're forced to have side conferences, whether it's an educational educators of color conference or a POC conference. Those are those side conferences that are now starting to happen because the educators of color, the minorities, they're not getting the big stage or the big opportunities to grow their following and to tell their story.
It really is just too expensive though too. Like, I mean, ISTE is like $800 or something like that to register to go to be able to walk in the damn building. You're spending $800, and that just doesn't seem equitable in the current environment in so many ways. And the idea that there are tons of districts, and we know this, we totally know it's true that there are districts that just have nothing, that barely have buildings that are functional, let alone be able to afford to subsidize their educators to go and you'll have the superintendents that say, I'm not going to pay for you to go to San Diego for a 4-day vacation. It's or Miami to FETC. I mean, part of the reason FETC's attendance was cited as being low last year this just passed was it was in Miami. I mean, and you had supers that said, are you crazy? I'm not letting you go to Miami. I mean, so it's just,
I know, like, some of the things that I've been able to do, some of the conferences that I've been able to attend, I had to come out of my own pocket to do those things. So luckily I've been in a situation where I've had the financial resources to kind of offset some of those costs of going to a conference, where it may be like I'm talking to my district and my previous district, where it's like, okay, if you pay my registration, I'll take care of my hotel and my per diem. You don't have to worry about that. So you have teachers who are making those kind of deals with their district to figure out how they can go, and doing GoFundMe's and donors choose to go to a conference. And that's not right. I mean, that shouldn't happen.
Yeah. And, it's cyclical, because you talked about how, educators of color are having to do these side conferences because they're not getting kind of that national kind of attention. But that's actually what gets you, for example, relationships with vendors and businesses, like to do presentations, like for Microsoft. So Microsoft says, hey, I'll let you, we'll cover your entrance fee and your hotel if you do a couple sessions for us or something like that. That happens all the time. Every conference, a lot of the folks that are doing sessions for these companies or whatever are getting most of their fees covered. But, if it's not educators of color that are getting the attention, they're not getting the notoriety they deserve, then they're not getting these opportunities from these big companies. It's cyclical, and it's feeding on itself. And I think it's a really big problem, and I am not afraid to put the onus on these conferences to start reducing their entrance fees, because I think that's one of the places where it starts. How can an educator of color even acquire kind of any sort of attention or national stage if they're not even able to, like, you get accepted to present at ISTE, but you can't even come because it's so expensive, right? Like, that's the problem they face. Like, and I've actually had that problem. ISTE, what is it, San Antonio, whatever year that was, 16. I was accepted and I couldn't afford to come. So I could present, but I couldn't get there. So because it was so expensive, they're like, "Hey, you get to present, but you got to pay us $700 to show up."
And how crazy is that when you think about it in a big perspective? It's if I was an entertainer, I was like, "Hey, you get to perform at our concert, sweet." Okay, you have to pay to get here. You're gonna have to pay everything, all your expenses paid, come out of your pocket.
yeah.
But people are coming to see you. But, you don't get anything out of it except the fact that you get to put your name and put on your resume that you presented at this conference. And at some point, that can't be enough. You can't just say, oh, well, presenting at our conference, you can put this on your resume. Yeah, that's nice. But still, it would be nice if I could get something to go there, whether it's my entry, my registration covered. Some of those things we have to figure out a way to work that into the system. And then, like I said, you definitely have to have, we have to have our white males, white females that are the headliners, if you will, put pressure on these conferences as well. Whether it's asking to see who else is going to be a paid speaker at this conference, asking them to see that list. So when you see that list and you don't recognize any of those names or none of those names are people of color, putting the pressure back on that conference and saying, yes, I'm a big name. You want me here. You need to diversify your roster because this is not acceptable. And that's ultimately where that change is going to start happening.
100%. It's a way for those folks in particular to really show their allyship. And, instead of, just tweeting a tweet, or putting a nice little post on their Facebook page, put your money where put your money where your mouth is, and show that you're an ally by demanding equitable representation at large conferences.
It's really great to put like I said, it's really great for a hashtag, but after the dust settles on the hashtag, what are you doing? What are your actions?
Yeah, 100%. And speaking of putting people's money where their mouth is and actions and stuff like that, I'm actually also curious. Both yourself and Glenn, in fact, are either directly or indirectly involved in making decisions about what technology to use in your districts, in your schools, and in your classrooms. And for myself, I'm directly involved in at Participate, who we decide to partner with, who we decide to work with, especially if we're working with them, in some sort of reduced financial capacity, which we're actively doing right now with a lot of folks. And also for the podcast, who we decide to bring on as a sponsor for the podcast. It's become an important conversation to consider if and I'm curious if you've had any conversations or put any thought into your support for companies or products based on how engaged you perceive them to be in this moment. I had a conversation with a company who wanted to sponsor the podcast just like literally 2 or 3 days ago, and the first question I asked them was, show me what you've said about what's going on in your country right now. It was the first question I asked them. And I think it's important, and I'm curious if you've put any thought into that sort of is it going to be part of your equation?
I know it will be in my the way I look at working with vendors. It's our what we say in our district is educational excellence for all. And so if we're talking about all of our students, we want to make sure that the companies that we're partnering with have that same idea where it's all of their students, and not to all lives matter this, but to make sure that they are seeing the moment that we're in right now, and that they have taken a stand on this is unacceptable and we need to do things to move it forward, and not just lip service. And, even looking at who's on their board of directors, who are the curriculum writers, who are the people who are creating the content that we are delivering to our students. Because my district, we're about 54% African American. I want to say it's somewhere about 30% white in our population. So we need to make sure that the curriculum content, the resources, is written and developed by a diverse group of people to meet the needs of our students. And if they can't show that to us, then I don't necessarily want to spend our dollars there. Because if we do that, I'm just as bad as everybody that I say needs to enact change, because I'm feeding the beast. I'm continually to donate my dollars to a company that's not doing the things that I'm talking about when I'm not on the company dime. So I have to make sure that I am doing what I'd say other people should do as well.
So where can people connect with you? Where can they learn more about you? How can they connect with you on social media?
Oh, I'm pretty active on Twitter, Ask Adam 3. It was when I got on Twitter, coming up with my Twitter name, it just kind of fit, because going back to when I was a teacher in the classroom, anytime someone had a technical problem, it was like, oh, I don't know, ask Adam. And when it was time for me to look for it, unfortunately, somebody already had Ask Adam. But I am the third. So it just kind of worked out to add as Ask Adam 3 on Twitter is what I have. And you can find me online at askadam3.com. In addition to doing my day job as a director, of course, featured speaker, keynote, and I do staff development training and consultation for districts across the country as well.
Adam Phyall, Dr. Adam Phyall, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast.
Thanks for having me again, guys.
Thanks for listening to OnEducation. My name is Glenn Irvin. My co-host is Mike Washburn. OnEducation is part of the On Podcast Media Network. You can listen to this show and many others by great educators like Monica Burns, Mike Matera, Tisha Richmond, and many more by visiting onpodcastmedia.com. Want to get in touch with us? Check out our website at oneducationpodcast.com. You can tweet us at OnEducationPod. Mike is at Mr. Washburn on Twitter, and I can be found on Twitter at IrvSpanish. You can find us on Facebook by visiting facebook.com/OnEducationPod. We're also on Instagram at OnEducationPod. If you're enjoying the show and think others would too, we would be thrilled if you shared it with them. Please leave us a rating or review in Apple Podcasts or Google Podcasts. When you leave a rating, it gives our podcast rankings a boost. This helps others discover the show. We want to thank our presenting sponsor, Participate, for supporting us. Check out participate.com to learn more about them. Thanks as always for listening. Stay awesome and see you soon.